Okay, good evening, everybody. So I can just see sort of people filtering in from the waiting room. So I'll just kind of give it a few seconds for everyone to come through. Thanks very much for spending your evening with us this evening. Better than being outside. Okay, the flood of people slowed down slightly, so I'll kick off because I have the honour of doing the boring bit that people don't really want to hear, and we want to get onto the panel discussion, so you want to get me out of the way. Okay. Good evening, everyone. So my name is Jess. I'm the outreach coordinator at Inner Temple, one of the 4 Inns of Court. And we've got my lovely panel here this evening, as well as my counterparts at Gray's Inn and Middle Temple as well. Lincoln's Inn were going to join us. My counterpart there, Alexis, unfortunately has some family commitments today, so couldn't make it. But we have panelists from all 4 inns here this evening to kind of talk you through their journeys to the bar. And as I said, unfortunately, you have me for a few minutes talking through the kind of the boring bits, just so we're sort of coming up this webinar from the same point, the same place of knowledge, just to make sure everyone's kind of up to speed. So a few procedural things. This webinar is being recorded, as you probably should have got that sort of notification when you joined. So after this webinar, I'll be putting it up on YouTube, and then everyone who's registered for the event will get a recording. So get a link to that recording, and then I'll also circulate these slides as well that I'm going through, so you don't have to remember absolutely everything that's said. So you will have access to that. If you do want to ask a question at any time, probably around the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A box, so you can just pop a question in there. You can ask a question anonymously if you would prefer. If you have a question for a particular panelist, something someone has said has sparked something particularly of interest, please do feel free to kind of mention them in that question. So then our chair, Fiona, will know perhaps who to direct that to. If you don't have one that you're aiming it at, that's okay. Fiona will use her judgment and make sure that it gets asked to the best possible person. And we'll also be answering some questions in the Q&A as we go along, if they're quite simple and don't necessarily require a panelist response. Cool. So I think that's all of it on kind of housekeeping. So I'm just going to go on to kind of a few bits. And if you'll forgive my rudeness, obviously I've got 2 screens, and so I'm looking away from you because I'm looking at my PowerPoint. So just to kind of touch on a few things around kind of the profession. We're going to know what is it to be a barrister. We like to kind of cover some key points before we go into our panel discussion. You'll find, hopefully, from our panelists' viewpoints, that it is a career which is considered, highly rewarding, really intellectually stimulating. And to some degrees, there's a flexibility found in the profession that perhaps you don't get in others. That you are probably aware that most barristers are self-employed, around 80%, that's sort of the going statistical figure these days. 80% are self-employed, and most of those are within chambers. And then you have sort of 20% sort of growing each year, the employed bar. We have some panelists who are in employed practice, so you'll get to hear a little bit about perhaps the differences between the self-employed bar versus the employed bar. The main thing to kind of take away, perhaps particularly from my sort of few slides, is that it is a very competitive and rigorous process to become a barrister. That you have stumbled upon this webinar, you probably already aware to a certain extent of that rigorous process, but I'm just going to talk about it in a little bit of detail now, because this is a profession that it can be a little bit challenging to find out those key pieces of information, and if you have found that challenging, don't worry, you're not alone. So in terms of the route to the bar, how do you actually get there? What do you need? Qualifications wise, when we're looking at what we call the academic stage, that means that you need to have a law degree of some type. So it might be that you have a non-law undergraduate degree, and then you do the conversion course, the graduate diploma in law, the PGDL, all sorts of things that we call it, but that's what it is. So you need some sort of law degree. And then you go on to what we call the vocational stage. So that is your bar course. You may well have seen it called the BPTC, the BVC, the BPC. We like lots of acronyms in this profession. And I like to just call it the bar course. Keeps it nice and simple. So you'll do that via a bar course provider, someone like ICA, perhaps, BPP, ULaw, City. Those organisations provide the bar course, and then you also have qualifying sessions with your Inn of Court, and that's part of why we exist, because we offer those qualifying sessions that run kind of alongside and complement your bar course. Now, traditionally, the bar course takes an academic year, so autumn to summer, if you undertake it full time, but there's sort of growing part-time provision and January starts and that kind of thing. So there's not just one way to undertake the bar course now, but I'm sure you'll kind of stumble across that in your research as well. So at this point, you've done the academic stage, you've done the vocational stage. You are then called to the Bar of England and Wales. And so the Inns of Court are the only organisations in England and Wales that can call you to the bar. And that then confers upon you the title barrister. However, at that point, you still are not a practicing barrister. You cannot practice until you've undertaken this year of work-based training. So we call it pupillage because we like to give things funny names in this profession. But I like to think of it as work-based training because that's a bit more familiar to me. So pupillage is split into a first 6 and a second 6. So first 6 months, mostly observing, and then the second 6 where you are undertaking work yourself. Only then, are you getting your practicing certificate? Only then are you a practicing barrister. So it's that bit pupillage that is really, really competitive, and that's where, most people that's perhaps their barrier to becoming a barrister, obtaining pupillage. So in terms of, okay, what can I do to increase my chances of obtaining pupillage? What do I need to know? What's important? It's really important to be realistic. So a good degree, and what we mean by that is a first or a 2-1 in your law degree. Again, whether that's the GDL or an undergraduate law degree is absolutely crucial. Very few people are obtaining pupillage if they don't have a 2-1 or higher. And in certain practice areas, you are much more likely to succeed if you have a first as well. It's not to say that if you don't have a first, you cannot come to the bar, but that competitive element, having a first, slightly sets you apart from having 2-1. So it's important to remember your academic qualifications are important in this profession. And if you don't have those kinds of grades, what's important to realise is that your additional kind of work experience, perhaps you're coming to the bar 20 years after you first got your degree, and what you bring to the table then is slightly different, and it's about kind of marketing that and highlighting that as kind of transferable skills. It is really, really important to have that level of determination. And also, I think that goes hand in hand with that is resilience. Our panel may well touch on this, but it's more likely than not that you will face setbacks in your journey to the bar, and that doesn't necessarily mean, right, great, that's not the profession for you then, never mind, gonna give up now. Unfortunately, that is kind of the reality, and it's about how you you face those setbacks, how you deal with it, how you push on. If you think this is the career for you, then you should absolutely pursue it, but it's not necessarily that you're going to complete your law degree and then you're going to start the bar course and then you're going to get pupillage, boom, 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 and that's okay. And so it's important to kind of try and sort of have that ready in your mind, so that if you do face setbacks, that you're not absolutely crushed by that. The big thing that we talk a lot about, and people are quite often quite concerned about when they're thinking, oh, how am I going to get to the bar? We talk a lot about mini pupillages, and so that's the bar's term for work experience. Now these are increasingly competitive as well, and so what is important to remember is that a mini pupillage is important. It gives you a really good insight into the profession, but it's not the only experience that matters or that demonstrates that you have the skills to succeed at the bar. So what I also like to put on here is this point about additional work experience. Maybe you're a university student and you work in your student union bar in the evenings or at the weekends, or maybe you are a care home assistant, maybe you work at a fast food chain. Most students these days have part-time jobs. I had to have a part-time job when I went to university. an undisclosed number of years ago, and the situation hasn't got any easier since then. So we understand that people are coming to this profession with a wealth of experience in lots of different areas. The bar is predominantly a profession that involves working with people, and if you have a job now that means that you work with people, how do you then relate those skills to how do you translate them into the work of being a barrister? It's really important to think about that, because what experience you bring could be really important, could be really valuable, but you need to think about it and need to be able to talk about it and think, well, yeah, how does that suit me in this profession? Another really big key thing in terms of getting to the bar is how are you going to fund it? There's no escaping the fact that the bar course is a really expensive qualification. Now, you can, in some situations, combine it with an LLM, so a master's degree, and access postgraduate student finance if you're eligible for that via Student Finance England. But not everybody is, or perhaps if you've already undertaken the GDL and you've used postgraduate student finance for that, you're not necessarily going to be able to use that for the bar course. It's also a bigger undertaking to do the masters alongside your bar course. So you have to think really carefully about how you're going to finance it. And so that's where the Inns of Court also come in and our scholarships come in. So across the four of us, we award around £6 million each year in scholarship funds. Now, that's not just for the bar course, although the largest portion of our scholarship money does go towards bar course scholarships. We do also offer GDL scholarships, as well as other kinds of scholarships and grants, which I won't spend too much time talking about this evening. So the bar course kind of scholarships, most of the inns award, the maximum amount we kind of award is around the 21,000 mark. And so eagle-eyed amongst you will notice that the bar course can cost up to £20,000, but as you'll be very aware, it does cost money to live. And so a bar course scholarship from an inn might not necessarily cover every single expense that you have while doing the bar course. So it's important to think how you're going to finance that. But one thing we really want people to take away is that if this is a career that interests you, that you're really keen about pursuing, then you should be applying for an Inn of Court scholarship. You can only apply to one inn for a bar course scholarship. So some of you will be applying in the current round, and applications for those bar course scholarships close first Friday in November, so not long now. Can you believe it? We're nearly in November. Nobody say the word Christmas to me, please. So it's important to kind of have those time frames in mind, because if you are planning to start the bar course in about a year's time, or sort of autumn next year, you should be applying for a scholarship in the current round. It's nothing worse than speaking to someone 1 month before they start the bar course and they haven't thought about how they're going to finance it, and they say, can I apply for a bar course scholarship? And they should have applied last year. So that's a really difficult conversation. So if you're a few years away, the main thing to think is, okay, when I'm 1 year away from starting the bar course, that's when I need to be applying for an Inn of Court scholarship. The money is there. We want people to apply for it. We want the best candidates to get that money to support them in their journey to the bar. So some of the kind of differences across the four inns. Inner and middle, we interview everyone who applies. Grays and Lincolns do what we call a paper sift, even though the application forms are all online now, that's still what we call it. There's no right or wrong way necessarily to do things. We all just kind of do things in slightly different ways. What's really important though is, regardless of whether you are guaranteed an interview, the application form still really, really matters. It's still really important. And so it's really, really important that you pay close attention to the scholarships criteria on each of the Inn's websites, whichever one you end up applying for. Make sure that you really understand the criteria that are listed there. I've not bothered putting them up on the slides because our criteria are sort of similar but slightly different, and so once you get caught up in all of the wording, it would get pretty confusing. But they're all really drilling down to very similar skills. So if you're a few years away sort of from applying for those bar course scholarships, I really recommend you look at the criteria now and think, okay, what do I have necessarily? What experiences do I think that could align to these criteria? And if you think, well, I don't know about advocacy, I don't know if I've got something to demonstrate it, go out and find something that will help you. And perhaps the panelists will kind of touch on things that are going to be helpful. So yeah, again, the timelines are up there. And the most important thing is that the information is it's on our website, it's out there. So please do kind of investigate it. Yeah, and then I think that's enough from me to kind of scare you with all the, okay, you must think 1 year in advance. And now we'll actually hear from some really interesting people who will talk to you about their journey to the bar. If I could hand over to our chair for the evening, Fiona.
Well, hi and good evening, everybody. Welcome again, and thank you very much for joining us. I'm delighted to be chairing this evening's event. I'm a self-employed barrister, a member of my chambers at 33 Chancery Lane, and I've now been doing this job about 26 years. I'm self-employed and I'm presently in charge of Inner Temple's Scholarships and Outreach Committee. So I'll be very happy to answer questions later in the question and answers session about life at the bar, applying for scholarships and our work generally, but not obviously give you a crib to the perfect answer for each scholarship interview question. But it's more important for you now to hear from our specially selected 4 panelists about their routes to the bar and scholarships. We've chosen one from each of the 4 Inns of Court so they can give you different perspectives about life in the inns, as well as about their own careers. They'll speak for about 10 minutes or at most 15, and then we'll start first with Callum Reid Hutchings. He was called 2 years ago by Gray's Inn and now practices from Gatehouse Chambers in London, where he specialises in commercial litigation, employment law, company law, insolvency and defamation. Callum, over to you to tell us about yourself.
Thank you, Fiona. Hi, everyone. It's the first time I've actually spoken to a camera in about 2 years directly, so not seeing everyone's face, so we'll see how weird this is. I was going to start with actually, so you all know I'm from Gray's Inn now, and I was going to start with actually sort of my journey before getting to the bar, because everyone takes a different route, I think, and it's quite helpful to know what routes people take. So I'm from a state school. I'm I believe, the first person in my school to have ever gone really into law. And there wasn't necessarily pathways at my school to discuss how you even become a lawyer, or let alone a barrister. And it wasn't actually until my second year at university I got approached by my head of law to say, do you think about becoming a barrister? I'd be perfectly honest, I wasn't really sure what one was. So that was the starting point I had. And I think also, just to provide context, because I'm sure there's people in the audience who might have this. I have dyslexia, ADHD, and ASD, which used to be called autism. And it's quite helpful to know there are ways to get into the profession with those conditions, and I have all 3, the full cocktail. So and anyone can ask me questions about that. And then I did my undergrad, went quite well, and my head of law said you should apply to Gray's Inn. So I didn't really think about anywhere I would choose, and that's because I think my head of law was a member of Gray's Inn, said apply there. And so I did. I went for an interview, because Gray's and Lincoln's Inn do their own, as has already been said, they do a paper sift, and then you have your interview. And it was a 15-minute interview. I don't believe that's changed now. And this is just for the bar course. I didn't do the GDL. And it was a preparation. You given 2 topics, you could pick one, and then you would go and effectively argue it with three of the members of the panel who are interviewing you, and be asking various questions thereafter. And I suppose what might naturally follow is, how do you really prep for a scholarship interview? It was my first ever type of interview like that, and I hadn't actually done any pupillage interviews or anything like that beforehand. And one thing I would say when you're going for a scholarship interview is they've all read your application. So make sure what you're saying about yourself matches up exactly with what you've been talking about in your application, because it needs to match that. And I don't mean as in you make sure you say everything is correct, but make sure you know everything about yourself, and don't forget things that you've actually done. And also, I think it's really important in the application phase is not to just say, I've done this, I've done that, I've done this, I've done that, because obviously it's implicit because you put it there. What I think you should be doing, anyone doing an application, is saying what you've learned from the various experiences you've had. And I think you'd be very surprised as to what things you can talk about. It was touched on before, is that I put in and I still did it in my pupillage applications, all the jobs I've ever done. So my first job was when I think I was 13 or 14 doing pot washing. And I talked about it in my scholarship interview application. I said, well, and people said, why would you mention something like that? You'd be surprised what skills can be transferable into the job, into the bar, from any job you may have done. So don't underestimate things you've done just because you haven't maybe done very much legal work experience at all. Don't rule that out, because I think one skill you should be trying to show in your applications and then also the scholarships interviews is actually what the skills of a barrister are. And I think, in my view, it's presumed that you probably will have good advocacy skills and good written skills and communication skills. I think also you should be looking at what other skills a barrister will need to have. And it's actually, I don't think it's something I knew about until I've actually become a barrister, is good decision-making skills and ability to work under pressure are actually really good skills to show that you have and you've done from other jobs. And you'll be surprised what jobs you may have done beforehand or experience you have, which shows that. And also showing your academic ability as well in the scholarship interviews is important. And I think that all equally applies for any pupillage interviews you go on to do. And also understanding of issues that are ongoing around the world at the moment, and looking at the legality of those issues. I can't remember I shouldn't say what my topic was, just in case they did ask it again. But it was a contemporary issue that was in the UK at the time, involving human rights issues. So you should have an answer and you should have an opinion. You should be able to express it. I think that those are the 2 points I'd like to make on those things. And then if I was to go on to maybe a topic about practice area and also working life, because I think it's important to discuss what the working life is of a barrister, because everyone says, oh, you're self-employed, it must be great. And it has its pros, it has its cons. And it really depends on, does that suit you as a person? Because you don't really want to find out after you've got there, I think. And I think there's 2 things with self-employment that are really important to know. The first is you don't know necessarily when you're going to get paid. After pupillage, you'll get your scholarship award and you'll get your guaranteed earnings. But in the year after, it's a bit ad hoc. It's not like you're on a salary and you're going to get paid at the end of every month. It does come and go. And I think that is a really important thing to understand, and some of the stresses that can bring with it, particularly when you're starting out, and it can take a bit of time for payments to come in. That's the reality of the profession sometimes, and building that up. I think also whilst people say you're self-employed, you can start at 12, you can get up late, you can go to bed, you can do whatever you want. It's being able to manage saying no, I think, actually, because what will happen is when you start is you'll be saying, I think, well, at least if you do what I did, saying yes to almost every single thing that comes through, and you will not really have much of a life, and it's managing that. And I think something really important to think about, because also maybe others will disagree with me on this, but it's a very lonely profession as well. And sometimes you are going to be by yourself working, not speaking to many people, although it's very collegiate. You can go and see other members of your chambers or friends, etc. There are times where it is quite lonely, and the social interactions aren't quite the same. If, for example, if you were to go to a law firm, I used to work at a law firm, so I can speak for that. It's slightly different, and people do just look to you to make a decision most of the time. And then, managing that workload, you do have, I have practice managers and clerks who help me do that. But it's also a skill you have to just learn yourself. Otherwise, it's not going to, it doesn't happen magically when that's happening. And also with self-employment is, usually the work's not just going to land on your desk. You have to go out nowadays, I think, and I mean, some people luckily have it straight away, but it's a very competitive profession. I think that's the reality of it. There's lots of people who are all similar levels, and they could all pretty much do a very good job on the same thing, particularly when starting out. And what that comes with, it's the ability to run a business actually, and a practice. That's what it is, and how you can do that. And that is another thing to consider, being self-employed. a final thing, perhaps I don't know what time I'm on yet, in terms of recommended voluntary experience and work to do. I think it's a given. You would have done many pupilages, maybe not lots of by your scholarship, but at least by the pupillage interviews. And then also you would have done some volunteering experience. Now, I believe almost whilst you're on the bar course, you can start doing the free representation unit. And I think also you should be going to have a look at doing sort of the citizens advice. And most law schools, I believe, in the country now do have some form of a law clinic, and you should be working with them because you can learn a lot of skills and see how, and highlight those sort of things. And also mooting is, I think, is a must. But also, I think you should be thinking about doing debating. Now, it's different to mooting, and there's lots of debating clubs at universities now. And it's something I did a bit of. It's joining a debating club. It doesn't have to be, so whilst some of you might not actually be at university anymore, there are lots of debating clubs to join. And I'm not necessarily saying that so you can put it on your scholarship or pupillage applications. It's so you can develop your skills, right? Because what's going to happen in these interviews, scholarship or pupillage, you at some stage going to have a debate, and you're not really sure what you're going to be debating about sometimes, particularly on some pupillage interviews. I still remember now I was asked a question. It's like, how would you explain hierarchy to a child? And I had no idea what to say to that. I'm still not sure I would do now. But the point being is it's actually building those skills that you're going to need to succeed in these various stages. And it equally applies to court because whilst mooting is important, and I've done a lot of mooting, I think it might have some limitations on what you sometimes do in the jobs if you just did mooting, because it's sometimes a bit prescriptive. You know what the problem is. Then there's a speed mooting now, which actually I think might be slightly different to that, but it's going through those debating style exercises where you're not really sure what you're going to be asked and thinking of an answer and still communicating it properly when you haven't had any time to prep. And I think that's a good skill to learn for these interviews and also for when you become, um, start practicing as some guidance. I believe I've probably covered as much as I can within the time, and I hope that was helpful.
Yeah, it was extremely helpful, Callum, and people have been typing questions in while you've been speaking that we'll come back to in the Q&A session and touch on in the round with other people's experiences as well. But thank you so much for the moment. And I'll turn next, if I may, to Alexandra Sutton, who is a member of Inner Temple, who since 2017 started off in self-employed practice in the north of England in a chambers in criminal, regulatory and common law work, and she's now taken a slightly different path and is an employed barrister in the government legal department. Alexandra, thank you again for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Thanks, Fiona. So yes, as Fiona said, my name's Alex. I was called to the bar in 2017, and I've had a bit of a circuitous route at the bar already, starting in self-employed practice and recently moving to employed practice, which I'll talk about in a little bit more detail later on. I'm going to talk a little bit about my background and my route to the bar, my current practice, my top tips, and some things about what I wish I'd known when I was starting out, what I've learned in the last 6 to 7 years. So starting with my background, I'm from Oldham in Greater Manchester, and I went to what's called a voluntary aided school, which is a state school that's selective on certain grounds. My school was what's called a faith school. It was a C of E school, but in essence, a state school. Much like Callum, I was the first in my family to go to sixth form and then on to university after that. So not from an academic or professional background. I knew that I loved to learn, but other than that, I wasn't really clear on what I wanted to do after university. At various points in school, I wanted to be a spy, I wanted to be a diplomat. At one point, I wanted to be a journalist and a politician. And I think the vibe of all of those things is being involved in other people's business, which I do think slightly translates to the career that I have ended up doing. But absolutely did not think about being a lawyer, didn't know any lawyers, certainly didn't know any members of the bar. I first applied to university straight out of sixth form. I think as those who have recently been into uni, those applying now will know, you tend to apply to 5 universities. I did. I was offered 1 out of the 5 spots, which was an initial setback. My grades were really good, and I was really surprised by that. I think my personal statement was just not have been great. So I was offered this 1 university spot, and I took it up. And it was a good university, but I arrived, and after a month, I just really, really didn't like it. So that was my first sort of setback. It was a huge decision. Do I just stick it out because I'm here now and it's a good uni, or do I go? And I decided to leave and have a year out, which obviously came as a big surprise to me and to my family. But actually, I think ended up being a really good experience. So I had a year out. I worked in River Island, if anybody knows it, retail shop still exists. And I also worked in a primary school as a teaching assistant. So nothing particularly exciting, but both experiences transpired to be really, really useful for my future career. And I reapplied to university during that year, and I got into Oxford University, which I know is a massive privilege, and it was very, very exciting and very surprising. It was very daunting, but I was really fortunate and had a really nice group of friends, and I studied English literature there. Again, didn't really know what I wanted to do, just wanted to enjoy the university experience. So got to the end of university, still didn't know what I wanted to do. I thought about journalism. I did a bit of work experience with various newspapers, but again, as some of you may have had similar experiences, in that particular industry, there's a lot of unpaid internships. It's quite hard to do. Well, I found it quite difficult to do outside of Manchester. You wanting to kind of explore these fields, but obviously you've got to support yourself at the same time. So ultimately, I decided to get a job. I got a job working as a research assistant for a arts consultancy, which very succinctly involved doing research for museums and galleries. So again, totally unrelated to law. It sounded quite exciting on the face of it, but the reality was that it was a lot of time spent on Excel doing research, and I just wasn't particularly excited by it. And I figured what I wanted to do was something that involved working with people and that made a difference. And at that time, a lot of my friends seemed to be looking into law, which is partially why I thought about it. It looked like it was fairly stable. It looked like the money was all right. And again, I was supporting myself. So I had a look into that. I wasn't particularly interested in going down the solicitor route, because one of the reasons I wanted to leave my previous job is because it was a lot of office time. I wanted to do something where I was out and about meeting people. So I turned to the oracle that is Google, and I looked at different routes into law, found various articles about the bar, and actually came across an Inner Temple event, a bit like this one, on Eventbrite, that was held up in Manchester. So I went along to that, and there were lots of barristers who were members of Inner Temple there. That was the first time I'd ever met a member of the bar, and had a chat with them, and it was great, and they seemed to really like their jobs. It sounded super interesting. It was really encouraging that this event was being held in Manchester. And yeah, even though I'd sort of gone along on my own and felt super nervous about it, everyone was really lovely, and it really encouraged me to think about the bar. So I emailed a chambers in Manchester just off the cuff, because again, I didn't really know how many pupilages worked, and managed to get a mini pupillage and absolutely loved it. Thought it was so interesting. I liked the fact that it was academic, but also you're working with people's real life stories. And that's what sort of set me off on the path. So at that point, when I decided that it was a career that I wanted to pursue, the question that you have to ask yourself, and I had to ask myself, was how am I going to fund it? It's a difficult question to think about, particularly if you're not from a particularly affluent background, as I wasn't. And as Jess helpfully set out, you can't shy away from it. It is something that requires an investment up front. And you have to, I think it's an important question to ask yourself: how are you going to do it? Would you consider taking a loan out? Do you want to get do you want to go through the scholarship applications? There are all these different options. And not having any personal connection to the bar or to the law, I found the event that I'd attended, hosted by Inner Temple, my sort of main point of guidance. It's how I found out about scholarships and about that process. So, I mean, I'd rather preempt the question, how did I choose the inn? The inn sort of chose me in that was the first one I went to. And I think, and Jess will probably correct me, or you may be able to ask questions in the chat, there's obviously a range of funding across the 4 inns. The decision that I took is because I needed to do a law conversion. Inner Temple had a scheme where they matched the GDL funding that you got if you then applied to the bar course. So I was a bit nervous about the financial impact, and that seemed like quite a good deal. So that was part of the reason that I chose Inner, along with the fact that I'd been to their event. And the scholarship process was really interesting because for me, I didn't have any legal experience because I'd done an English degree. So it was very much focused on what were my skills, what was my potential, rather than what was my actual legal experience. And I'd absolutely echo everything Callum said in that respect about what you're trying to show, about your kind of persuasion, your communication skills. They're not strictly to do with, or not at all to do with legal knowledge, and they're skills that you can draw from all of your previous experiences, whether that's at university, whether that's in the world of work, in order to show that you have the potential to be a great barrister. And I think that's, for me, what the scholarship interview process was about. And to do that, it's about sitting and thinking, well, what have I done, and how does this translate to this profession? And I think it's so important to let them see your potential, and to do that, to be ready and willing to talk about your motivations, and sort of be your honest self, because in any of these processes, be it scholarship applications or pupillage applications, you want to be able to be memorable and to set yourself apart. And the best way to do that is to sort of know yourself inside out and know your application inside out. So I went through that process, and I was really, really pleased to receive a scholarship from Inner Temple, which obviously, first and foremost, allowed me to do the law conversion and the bar course. Without it, I'd have really struggled. I may not have done it. But also it was a massive vote of confidence, because it meant I could go into pupillage applications thinking, well, these 3 barristers thought I was all right. So, maybe the pupillage process will go well as well. And in terms of other funding options, just to touch on that, because I do think it's quite important to address it, I also applied for funding from BPP, which is where I did my law conversion and my bar course. And that was a means tested process, and that also supported me on that journey. And in addition to that, I worked in a pub, and I also worked in a call centre, both of which gave me great skills, I thought, in terms of transferring them over to the bar, both of which gave me skills to use in a legal setting, which just goes to the point that Callum made so well about making sure that you can draw on all these real life experiences in this application process. So I then applied for pupillage whilst I was on the law conversion course. I did several mini pupillages in different areas of law. That's also something I'd really recommend. So when you are going through the application process, you can demonstrate and evidence a real interest in the bar, and also sort of say that you've given it, this is an informed decision. You've actually thought about what you want to do, and you're committed to doing that. And so I went through that process, and I was really, really fortunate to get pupillage up in Manchester, where I started out with a mixed common law pupillage, so doing a bit of everything, which was perfect because I didn't have much legal experience. So a bit of personal injury law, a bit of family law, a bit of crime. And I quite swiftly decided to specialise in crime. So I think one thing to notice about the bar is that it's not unlike medicine in some respects, in that there are a whole different range of types of barrister you can be. And each version of the job has a very different lifestyle, a very different type of practice. And I think, as Callum said, it's very, very good advice to research the different types of law and what that actually looks like in practice before you get started. And I think that would be one thing that I would do probably in a bit more detail had I my time again. Because as much as I loved crime, I found it very, very intense. It's very much a court-based role, which I did enjoy. I just don't think I'd appreciated that perhaps as much as I could have done when I first started. So yes, I'd very much recommend speaking to people when you go on that journey. In terms of crime, I absolutely wouldn't want to put people off. I loved it when I did it. Whilst it was a bit stressful, I had some great stories. I met some great people. You really are kind of in the cut and thrust of advocacy And I was involved in some really cool cases. I was involved in murder trials and serious organised crime. It gives you the best in a party tales you could possibly imagine. But I would say about it, the highs are really high in crime, and I found the lows quite low, which is why I explored another career path, and that career path took me to the employed bar. So I was very keen to stay at the bar, even if not in a criminal role. I love being a barrister. I love advising on the law. I love talking to people. And so I was keen to stay in that area. I also find politics super interesting, and being involved in something that has real public merit. Obviously, crime is very much a public-facing role, and serving the criminal justice system is so important. And I wanted to kind of take those qualities across. Which is why I looked into and applied for the government legal department. So the government legal department, essentially, if you are a government lawyer, a government barrister, you advise the government on the design and implementation of new law. That's an advisory role. You can also work as a litigator on litigation that the government might be involved in, which ranges from commercial issues to employment issues to public inquiries to national security. It's incredibly broad. My role at the minute is to provide legal advice to the Department of Culture, Media and Sport, which covers a really broad spectrum of topics, but probably most succinctly can be described as the government putting forward policies and myself and my colleagues advising them on the legality of those policies, and also advising them on how to turn their policies into legislation, then taking the legislation through Parliament with them, which is really exciting if you're interested in law. The process of turning those ideas into acts that you then kind of see on the page is a real privilege, I think. The difference between this version of the employed bar and my self-employed practice in crime is that I'm not in court anymore, which I do really miss. However, I do have more time to spend with the work that I do. It's fast-paced at times when you're advising ministers about issues. But it's a lot more structured in my experience than the self-employed bar, in that I have regular hours, I have a regular salary. This may seem years and years off. I have a pension, and you get sick pay, maternity, paternity leave, all of these kinds of policies that aren't always there at self-employed bar, and are things that, it is important to think about. I've also been really pleasantly surprised with the development opportunities at the employed bar. I found out recently a current member of the Supreme Court was formerly a government lawyer, which is very exciting. And again, if I had my time again, maybe it's something that I would have looked into early doors, whereas I only thought there was a self-employed bar and cracked on in that regard. So good to do your research, I would say. The theme, I think, of my experience, my run up to the bar, is that I've done a lot of things twice. So I went to 2 universities, I had 2 different careers, I've had 2 roles at the bar. And what I'll take from that, when I reflect on it, is that I've trusted my instincts on those occasions. And if something wasn't working out for me or didn't feel right, I had a go at doing something differently. It felt a bit mad at the time, and it felt a bit like a setback, but it has ultimately worked out. And I think that's something that's really important when going through this process, that, as Jess said, it may not always go right the first time round, but each of those experiences, I think, contributes to who you are as an applicant and ultimately who you will be as a barrister. The main thing I'd wish I'd known, and I still need to tell myself this on a daily basis, is that you are your own worst critic. Everybody at the bar, I think, often suffers with imposter syndrome, and it's really important to talk to others about that. So if you're feeling nervous about this application process, know that everybody else has as well. And you're absolutely not alone in that. But if I look back objectively, my career at the bar is going all right. It's doing okay. And even though I'm my own worst critic, I have to take a step back and realise that. And I'd absolutely try to do that when you're going through this process. And my final thing I would say is that ultimately it is a long career once you get here. I think because I'd had a year out before uni, a year out afterwards, I was like, I have to get pupillage straight away. I have to start straight away. I need to catch up. And actually, when you sort of stop and take a moment, I feel like I've done loads, and I've only been in the game for 7 years. All of that experience makes you who you are, makes you a better barrister. And I think that's why it's absolutely essential for the bar to be a diverse and inclusive profession, because all of that experience, practitioners from all walks of life, they bring their experience to the job. We represent the communities we serve. And that is what makes you unique as an applicant. So my biggest piece of advice is that please don't be afraid to rely on all of those varied experiences, because I think that's what sets people apart as a candidate. happy to answer any other questions. I'm not entirely sure how long that took me, but I'll be available in the chat.
Thanks, Alexandra. And I'm going to move on now swiftly, if I may, to Nina Reinach, who's a second six pupil at 33 Bedford Row. She was also called, like Alexandra, 2 years ago, but by Lincoln's Inn. And she's become particularly interested in human rights, social justice work within crime, family, civil, and regulatory law. Nina, can you tell us about how you came to the bar?
Yes, hello, thank you. As Fiona's just said, I do a mixed common law pupillage. I've actually just finished my pupillage and I'm waiting for a tenancy decision now. Just to talk a bit about my journey to the bar, maybe give you some advice. I have typed this all out in a document, which Jess has very kindly said that she will send on. So if I'm going very quickly, it's one, because we're on time. I'm trying to keep to my time, and two, there is a document and of course the recording if you feel like you've missed someone. But if just before I start, if everyone could please just close your eyes and picture for me, please, the best burger that you've ever had. The best burger, the taste, the ingredients, the texture of it. Right. So by way of analogy, we're going to be building a burger today. And like a burger, or like the burger that you've just pictured, every burger that's been pictured probably will be a different burger, different experience. And in the same way, each of your journeys, each of your backgrounds and circumstances to the bar will look different. So I'm going to explain a bit when I go through it about what I've done. But there is no wrong or right way. It's just a matter of taste and preference, really. And so just remember that yours very likely will look different. But in terms of the burger, there will be ingredients that overlap on each of yours. And I think these are the elements that I would say you'd need to build on in terms of your scholarship applications, but also in terms of pupillage applications to the bar. So I've drawn the burger here, if you will. Starting at the bottom, this is the heel of the burger. These are your academics. So everyone has explained a bit about, or at least Jess certainly has, as well as Callum, that the academics are pretty important. This is kind of the starting point of most applications. The advice, of course, generally is to get a 2-1 and above. If you're at uni at the moment, your academics need to be your priority. That's what you need to be focusing on now. I had quite an academic kind of journey on the way here. I have 5 degrees. I studied in South Africa, I studied in England. Of course, you absolutely do not need to do that. That is just the journey that I had. I really like student discounts and I like studying. So that's what I did. If you are no longer at uni, or if your results aren't great, fear not. A single little piece of bread at the bottom does not a burger make. There are other ways through the other elements to show that you do have the intellectual acumen to be at the bar, which is really what the academics are about. So fear not. Moving then, I think, to what is probably the most important bit of the burger, this is the meat here, is the advocacy. Callum has touched on this, that I would say can be demonstrated through mooting, mock trials. I know the inns and various chambers have opportunities. My advice is just sign up, get stuck in, do as much as you can. I did a lot of mooting over 10 years, try to do 1 or 2 every year. But of course, there's other ways to show advocacy skills and that you're developing those skills. You can do that through public speaking, debating, if you're an amateur, if you do amateur theatre, anything like that. And Callum also raised this, was that the interviews themselves are an advocacy exercise. So on the one hand, being a barrister, the job is advocacy, but to even get there, you need to have developed your advocacy skills for the interviews. And of course, you may very well be given a very literal advocacy exercise, like a bail application, or you have to write a skeleton and do submissions. Other ways to demonstrate those skills or develop those skills are if you, like me, have had any kind of job in a supermarket or a bar, or if you do maybe a marketing job, whatever job you've got, any position where you've had to work with difficult clients, difficult bosses, you've had to pitch sales, or kind of had roles where you've had to lead on projects, that kind of thing. Any role, any situation you have been in where you've had to advocate, persuade, or convince, all of that, those experiences are advocacy. Those are the skills you need. And so there's different ways to develop those skills outside of mooting, but I do think mooting is very valuable. It helped me with my studies and very much helped me with interviews. Right, moving on to the cheese. Okay, so this is the understanding, it's understanding the bar. You need to know what this job entails, and you need to show that you know what the job entails. The best way, or some of the ways to do that, are through marshalling opportunities, sitting with a judge, mini pupilages, doing actual work in a field of law, pro bono volunteering. I know some of the inns have marshalling opportunities. I did marshalling through university. In terms of mini pupilages, I think I did 10, completely unnecessary. I think the sweet spot is somewhere between 3 and 5. Just fire off as many applications as you can. It's kind of a numbers game. In terms of legal work, I was an immigration paralegal for a bit. I worked as a law reporter. But by far and away, the best job that I have ever had was being a Crown Court clerk. I got to see advocacy trials every day. I got to see how judges deal with counsel, witness handling. It was before I even knew I wanted to do crime. By far and away, the best job I've ever had. And if you are looking for a job, I cannot recommend more being a Crown Court clerk or usher. There are other things like being a magistrate, court legal advisor, county court advocate, those kinds of things. But really, all of that is just to develop your understanding of what the job itself entails. With that, I think if those opportunities are few and far between, the best advice I can give you, the most important advice I think I can give you, is to go to court. Take a morning or an afternoon, go to a 10-minute hearing, a 30-minute hearing, find a local court that's close to you and just go to court. Go speak to the usher at the court and say, listen, is there anything cool or interesting happening in here today? Is there anything I can sit in on? They'll guide you. It's so important that you see what court is like, what the work is like, what advocacy is like, the challenges, the kind of work that if you are, if you are working in this role, the kind of work that you very well may be doing. And if there's maybe an approachable barrister there, you might be able to kind of politely take them aside afterwards and ask them a bit about their journey or their perspective or the case. And that's another opportunity, I think, to gain that understanding of the bar. Moving on to the garnish, that's over there. Those are the extras, really. So not the priority, not the most important thing, but it adds a little bit of crunch, adds a little bit of texture. These are your extras. So anything that are, leadership positions in work or at uni, any sporting, activities that you've done. I was really into karate and took that incredibly seriously. So karate was a big one for me. Anything publications, if you including blog posts, if you have an area of law or a case that's interested you, write a blog post, send it off, see if someone will publish it. Essay competitions, I know Chambers, and I think even the Times of essay competitions, write the essay, send it in, you can say you've done it, you may well win something. Any kind of extras like that. I think with the extras, something that was very important to me was the IN scholarship. I did have university scholarship, but the IN scholarship really changed, was life-changing for me. It allowed me through Lincoln's Inn to be able to do the bar course. I will say that I chose Lincoln's because I was quite drawn to their international scholarships, for which I've now not applied to a single one, but the opportunity is there, so there you are. I also back myself in the paper sift. So I will say that when you think of your scholarship applications, where to apply, consider your strengths, and how to present those strengths. At the actual interview, I was grilled for 20 minutes on legal affairs, current affairs, my CV, and just really grilled. It was an incredibly tough interview. I cried the entire way home because I just thought, oh no, I was awful. That was dreadful. They were so tough. They were asking me really difficult questions, and I had to kind of stand my ground. Cried the whole way, only to then find out a few months later that I'd actually got a really good scholarship. So do you know what? You need to be grilled, you need to be tough, and you need to be optimistic. Then looking at the crown of the burger, so that is commitment to the bar. You can show commitment in your applications by relying on all the other things. You can say, well, I've done the mini pupilages, I've got the scholarship, I've done X, Y, Z. That shows that this is the job for me, this is what I want to do. That's the commitment. But what I do want to raise here as well is the commitment that you yourself need to make. So in terms of perseverance, it's been touched on that it is incredibly difficult. It is an incredibly difficult journey. And wanting it is just simply not enough. It's hard work, it's constant work. I think what helped me with that is that I got a mentor through the Lincoln's Inn Pupillage Foundation scheme. Your inn may well have opportunities like that. Otherwise, reach out to your inn and ask if they can maybe find, or if they know of anyone who'd be willing to mentor you. That can help you with interview practice, with someone proofreading your applications. If you don't have a mentor, rope in your friends, rope in your family, make it everyone's problem to help you with the process. Other things I did in terms of working through that commitment, through the perseverance, going to open days, events like these. I spent a lot of time on LinkedIn, on people's chambers profiles, looking at what they did. I signed up to like 1,000 chambers, newsletters to keep up to date with the law, with what members of chambers were doing. I will say, in terms of perseverance as well, that it's very important that you have those support networks in place through your inn, through your family, your friends, and any peers at the bar. But also you need to accept, and you need to get used to rejection. It feels very personal when you get those rejections. But the reality is you only need one yes. Some people get pupillage first time. I absolutely did not. It took me 4 years. I knew that I wanted to do this, and I knew I wasn't going to stop, and I would simply keep going. And that's exactly what I did. So my burger took me 12 years. I'm 30 now. It took me 12 years to put all of this together. It's not something that happens overnight. A lot of blood, sweat, and tears. And I will say that if you have a family, if you're a career changer, maybe someone who's working multiple jobs, someone whose time and resource pool comes from a background of circumstances where opportunities to build your burger, if you will, are harder to come by, you must know that the bar is for you. There is a place for you. There's absolutely no rush. This is an ancient profession. Jesus Christ himself was a bit of an advocate and had a pretty famous trial. And the point is that the bar is going nowhere. So take your time to do the things and to improve and to work towards it. And the final thing is just the secret sauce. And this is the worst thing. And I hated it when people said this, but the final thing really is luck. Someday something will click for you, but very often it doesn't. You can control all the other elements of the burger and all the other things that you build. The one thing you cannot control is luck. As I say, it's a matter of taste and preference. Some people like egg on their burger. I don't. I think that's quite grim, but some people love it. And other people, someday it'll be other people that get the opportunity. But as I say, you have to keep going. Don't discontinue the whole burger. Just keep improving the recipe. I think Gary Player said, the more I practice, the luckier I get. And so it is you build that luck for yourself, your chance is coming. I'm not sure how much time I have left, but just in terms of what I do, in terms of my work, I do mostly crime, 70% crime, about 20% family, 10% civil. As you maybe hear, I'm South African. I grew up in a family of dentists. I studied law, originally wanting to do journalism. And while I was signing up to register for my majors, a boy that I thought was very handsome asked me if I was doing law. I said, no, that sounds very boring. And he said, oh, well, it's like Suits. And I thought, oh, that sounds cool. And I crossed out journalism. And now 12 years later, here I am. Doing what I think is the best job in the world. I'm incredibly lucky, I feel. Now finishing my second six, in the last 6 months, I think I've done just over 250 hearings at 60 different courts. I was in the Old Bailey today. I do advocacy every single day. I've got trials, multiple hearings. I'll have a youth stabbing in the morning and then a civil injunction in the afternoon. I've got commercial colleagues or colleagues that do more commercial work. They're in chambers every day. They rarely, if ever, go to court. And some of the pupillages haven't done their own cases. They probably definitely get paid a lot more than I do. But that experience is not what I wanted from the bar. I'm excited by going to court every day, by dealing with people, working with people. As you probably will have guessed, I have pretty bad ADHD. I also have bipolar 2 disorder. And while that is immensely challenging in and of itself, of course, I'm sure a lot of you listening may also be neurodivergent. But I will say that this job is perfect for me. It's fast-paced. No 2 days are the same. I am in charge of conducting my own cases. And do, of course, I'm at court, but in terms of the work I do every day, set my own hours, and that suits me perfectly. In terms of mixed common law, as I say, the advocacy I'm drawn to, If you like the wig and gown, crime is for you. If you like the drama, the gossip, I think Alexandra said, if you like being in people's businesses, and if you're nosy, this is absolutely the job for you. But you know, joking aside, I think the reality of the job, certainly with crime, is that I work with people on days when it's the most difficult moments in their life. Sometimes I'm the only person there for my clients. I'm the only person there listening to them and speaking up for them. And that is, you know, it can be incredibly challenging and devastating, but ultimately it's just so rewarding. You know, and I think it's thank you. And just to say that I think it's just such a rewarding area of law to go into. And if you're in any way you know, driven by helping people, I think then mixed common law is something you should absolutely pursue. But thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Nina. And now our final speaker, last but by no means least, Elizabeth is a member of College Chambers. She was called to the bar in 2001 by Middle Temple. She practices in family and civil work in the south of England and is also joint head of her Chamber's Alternative Dispute Resolution team. Elizabeth, over to you.
Good evening, thank you. I'm set a timer, so I stick to the time limit because barristers are just rubbish at that. There we go. So I am self-employed and I'm a tenant in College Chambers, which is in Southampton. That puts me on the Western Circuit. Now in that sentence, there's at least two words that will be unfamiliar to a lot of people. What is a tenant? And I saw that in the questions. And what on earth is the Western Circuit? There is a lot of our language which is very unique to being a barrister. I am so passionate about decoding and demystifying our profession. I've done a whole podcast on it. Look it up, all your podcast providers, Nothing But the Truth with Elizabeth Bowden, and I literally do episodes on explaining what this is. Tenancy, think we work in a hippie collective. We're all self-employed, we work out of one building, we share resources. Tenancy, you do your pupillage, you get to the end of the pupillage, that's not game over just yet. You then have to make an application to join the club to become a member, and that's your final hurdle before you have a place to practice from. The areas that I practice in, family, civil, do a bit of court of protection, essentially crossover areas. The way that I got to that is that I, many moons ago, did my pupillage in London, actually in Hardwick, which is now Gatehouse, where Callum is. And I only wanted to do crime. That's all I was interested in. I was totally passionate about it from the moment that I decided I was going to be a barrister. It doesn't work particularly well if you have caring responsibilities. Or you need to work on a part-time basis, because you can't say to a Crown Court judge, I only work Monday, Wednesday, Friday. My plan A, to do crime and have a brilliant time swanning around in London in my wig and gown, and that's really all I was aiming for. I found myself due to have a baby. Now, my kids totally know this story. They totally know that they're massively loved, and they totally know that I wouldn't have it any other way. But doing crime and having small babies was not a good combination. So I stepped away from the independent bar for some 13 years and decided I was going to come back to it. But I didn't actually want to come back to crime because managing time on crime is very difficult. And I found a wonderful chambers in the south of England who were willing to retrain me. So I am here as kind of like an older person to tell you that this is not only a great career starting out as a young person straight from university, or even a mature student straight from university as a first career, but because we're self-employed and we self-regulate, sometimes you can take and do take a career break and you can come back to the bar and you can retrain in a new area. And because we are a very supportive profession, you will find chambers that say, yeah, you know what? Come and join our club, we'll retrain you. I had literally nothing to offer that chambers except enthusiasm, a good work ethic, and a willingness to roll my sleeves up. And those elements are really important, regardless of whether you are coming in as someone straight from university or later in life, because you might cover all the hurdles to get through university, to get through pupillage, to get through and become a tenant. But that final hurdle to become a member of the club, to get in on the hippie collective, chambers are looking for people who are going to roll their sleeves up and get stuck in. Because the other thing that no one talks about is that for most chambers, no, not the mega sets, most chambers are self-running. So I am the IT lead for our chambers. So I sort out all of our IT. That includes, for some reason, only known to man, I sort out the telephone systems. I sit on the management committee. I make decisions about budgets. We have annual general meetings where we set the budget in chambers. No one talks about this stuff, hence my podcast. I lay it all out for you, what it's really like doing this job. So it's really important that when I was there going, please do retrain me, and they said, sure, that they knew that they were going to get someone who was going to roll their sleeves up and get stuck in, because our profession doesn't work unless we all support each other, even though we're self-employed. Now, because I am a lot older and because I sit on pupillage panels and I read the forms, I see it very much from the other side. So when I joined, full disclosure, I went to private school and I'm typically what you would call the posh girl. If you listen to my podcast, you'll find I even went to school with my pony, but I am female and I am dyslexic, so it wasn't all plain sailing. I do see my dyslexia as a superpower, and I don't know if Callum or Nina or Alexandra would agree that, you know, being different actually really helps in this job. The way that I cope and manage with that is that I use as much tech as possible to help me. So I have about 14 systems in place before any work goes out. I use Grammarly, I use Read Aloud, I talk to type. But what I would say is anyone who's managing any of their differences, see what the problem is, see what the solution is and apply it, which is basically what being a barrister is like. It puts that into practice. Richard Branson recently launched University of Dyslexic Thinking. So if ever you want a crib sheet to how to sell neurodivergence as a superpower and the positives it brings, go to that website, join that university, it's free, and see how it is that he explains to people that thinking differently is a massive bonus to the workplace. My journey to the bar was deadly dull and boring. When I did eventually decide I wanted to be a barrister, I came with 3 A levels that weren't brilliant. I went to a non-Russell Group university and I realised, because we're barristers and we look at the problem, we find a solution, that my problem, not brilliant A levels and not a brilliant university, could only be overcome in 2 ways. Getting a really good degree, so I went out of my way to get a first, and making my work experience look interesting. Now, I was really lucky. I went and worked the summer in New York. I did that for free. That's not an opportunity that everybody can do. But what you can do is say, I'm going to do something that makes my CV look interesting. I worked all of the years that I was at university, mainly behind bars and in pubs. When it came to do you want to do the licensing exams, Elizabeth, so you can be the manager on site? Hell yes, I did. Because I could take that and I could say, hey, I know all about licensing. I see how law works in the real world. So whether you are in retail, whether that's in Tesco's, dealing with the alcohol, sales of alcohol, tobacco, lottery tickets, whether you are in a clothes shop, dealing with shoplifters, tills, fraud, all of that stuff. Everywhere you are in life, whatever job you're doing, you can work it so it makes your CV look interesting. One of the other areas that people get really stressed about is mini pupilages. Now, these cost a lot in time and money that people quite often don't have if they are working a number of jobs, if they have caring responsibilities, and if they're doing the bar course on a part-time basis, or, you know, just dealing with life on top of everything else. Mini pupilages, as far as I'm concerned, as someone who does paper sits and sits on pupillage interview panels, I know I can test your academics. I can look at what you got at university. I can test your advocacy by setting an advocacy exercise and interview. What I can't test is how much you really understand the job. And mini pupilages is what those let me know that you've looked into and understood what this job is. Going into a chambers and doing a mini pupillage is not the only way to get that information. So I think it was Nino saying, go to court, see what's going on. Absolutely. You don't have to go to court 5 days in a row. Go on a weekend. Sometimes there's Saturday courts. Now, those courts are very interesting, usually because people have come from the police station from an excellent Friday night out. If you've got a random day in the holidays, you can go to a court. It's not just Crown Courts. You can go to the Magistrates Court. You can go to the Coroner's Court. Look what's available to you that works with what you have to do. And if you live nowhere near a court, or you simply just don't want to go because, you know, they're not the most exciting buildings to get to on a Saturday or a wet Tuesday, there are a lot of online hearings that are available to you. Anybody can have an account with a website called CourtServe. You can then look up all of the court lists and you can see what hearings are sitting remotely. You then ask the court if you can join that hearing remotely, and they have to, because court hearings are public, let you join. Now, I'm not going to lie, sometimes these systems are not brilliantly executed by the court, but persevere. If you are genuinely interested in going to remote hearings, the Transparency Project, they will train people about how to access court of protection hearings online, and then you can even blog for them if you want. And if you're doing those things, getting into court, be it remotely or by video, I know that you're understanding what the profession is. The other thing that you can do is there are YouTube channels. The Supreme Court has a YouTube channel. The Court of Appeal has a YouTube channel. They're now putting criminal sentencing on, I think Sky News do it, and you can go back and watch the videos. Go and watch them. You know, put on your form, I have 3 jobs and 2 children and a mortgage. I cannot take a week off to do mini pupillage, but what I have done is this. Or I really enjoyed it when I sat down on a Friday night with a bowl of popcorn and watched submissions in this case. Because people will understand that you've looked into the profession and done what you can with the time that you have. I didn't apply for a scholarship. I'm not going to be a great help on those questions. I left it too late. So listen to Jess, don't leave it too late, and get your scholarship applications in. In terms of pupillage applications, I made tons, and I'm so old, I had to actually print them out on paper, put them in envelopes and apply stamps to them to get them in. I cannot tell you how many I sent. I got 1, and that's all that I needed. So just keep going and persevere, because, you know, eventually you will get your piece of luck that gets you in. That is my 10 minutes. My recommendations, if I had to nail it down to something that somebody else hasn't said today, get to know tech. Use Word properly, your life will be much easier. Understand how to use Excel. You will do more maths being a lawyer than you appreciate. Anytime there's costs, you're expected to stand up the minute you've had a decision to be able to deal with costs. Crime's probably different, but every area that I practice in, I have to be able to deal with costs almost immediately. I will put in the chat a link to a LinkedIn post that I did with all of those resources that I've talked about, so you can go and get experience elsewhere without actually having to take time off work and go into court yourself. There was a question about AI and whether I thought AI was a threat, or not me personally, whether AI was a threat to the profession. Now, AI cannot replace humanity, and it cannot replace the grey areas, which is literally the jobs that barristers deal with. I think, my personal view, as a human race, we can't check out of our own regulation and governance. And I don't think anybody is going to be handing over serious decisions that are court and law-based to a computer program. But that's my particular view. And I am with Alexandra, that the profession has been around for a jolly long time. And as humans, we like other humans to make decisions about the things that impact in a big way on our lives.
Thanks very much, Elizabeth, and thank you to all of our panelists for their introductory remarks, which I'm sure gave you a fantastic insight into their varied backgrounds and their varied routes to the bar and their current practice. So we're going to move on now, if we may, to spend the next 45 minutes or so fielding questions that have very kindly been submitted to us in advance, and also in the Q&A, which is appearing down the side of your screens, so that you should be able to see everybody's questions and answers. We're going to take as many questions as we can, and also to cover topics which as many people are asking as possible, to help the most people out. And I'll start at the beginning, if I may, with one that came into us before the workshop, and I'm going to direct it to our newest member of the bar, who's Nina, and ask you first what you found the bar course like.
My bar course, I did my bar course at City, and it was during COVID. So it was all online, all kind of, you know, done through Zoom and the like. I can only speak about City. I had a really, really good experience at City. I thought they were absolutely excellent in preparing us. I will say the bar course in and of itself is utterly tedious. It is incredibly boring. But the fact is you have to do it, full stop. And I think that is a good year if you are preparing, you know, if you have to do all sorts of the training elements before your call to the bar through your in, there's various requirements that you have to do, some different courses, ethics, advocacy, so on. That's a good time and to be involved in that. Also to do if you can make time for mini pupilages or going to kind of events like this, going to networking kinds of things, I think that's the best way to do that. In terms of the course itself, I will say the advice is that you should prepare, you know, do the work as it's given to you and prepare and so on. I should have listened to that. I absolutely did not do that. I just made sure towards the end that I had all my notes together. I know that some bar courses now divide the work into the centrally sat exams and the practical element. Try to keep on top of the work every week. It is very boring and quite dry, but if you are getting to the stage where you are doing the bar course and the bar exams, you've already at some point you know, sat exams. It's basically just, if I can put it this, you know, one of my lecturers said it's ABC, apply bottom to chair. You need to sit down and just rote learn it and get through it, I'm afraid. But yes, it's not the most difficult course, but only difficult in terms of knowing how to manage your time, managing it with all the other things that I think that year is useful for, as I say, doing stuff through your in or trying to beef up your burger and your experiences, but managing your time well and just sitting down and doing it, really.
Thanks, Nina. So just for the students who are listening in, the bar course is a course aimed at teaching you and equipping you with the skills to become a barrister, split between oral and written advocacy skills, negotiation and other similar client-facing skills, and also an element. Most of those elements are common to every area of practice, but also there are some elements you can take which are sections of the course designed to equip you for particular areas of practice, for example, commercial law, company law, family law. It's a course which you can take part-time as well as full-time, and the scholarships processes cater for that too. So do think carefully about whether you have the time to devote and commit to doing it online and over 1 year, or whether you might need to spread it part-time over more than 1 year. The other thing is, of course, the financing of it, and also about which provider to choose. You heard that Nina went to City Law School to do hers. Alexandra, which bar course did you choose and why?
So I went to BPP, and I think somebody asked in the chat how was that and what informed that decision. So as I said, I did the law conversion, so that was my first port of call. I wanted to study in Manchester. This was back in 2015, and I think the available providers in Manchester were University of Law and BPP. There wasn't a ton of difference, I thought, between them on the face of it, so I followed the money. BPP had a good funding scheme, particularly in terms of means testing, which was suitable for me and my circumstances at the time. And then I did consider changing provider for BPTC, purely for a change of scenery. No criticism of BPP at all, but ended up staying. And I share very similar views to Nina about that course. It totally did the job. I would look at funding if that is your priority, as it was for me, and also connections with the local bar if you do it outside of London, or equally within London, and what encouragement's given to extracurriculars and things like that. Different providers provide different opportunities, all of which will be relevant when you make your decision.
And another tip I would give is look at their success rates in getting candidates into pupillage, because, you know, everybody pays a fee to do the course, but look as well as at their success rates and the pass rates for the exam and getting people into pupillage before you select your course. So I'm going to move on now, if I may, to another question that we've had, which is about the LLM. Because a lot of people are thinking of, or maybe because of an element of funding that's available for it, thinking about doing an LLM. Callum, did you consider doing LLM? And what was your thinking process behind that?
Yeah, I did do an LLM, and I actually did it after the bar course. So I did it the weird way around. So did my undergrad, went to the bar course, then I went to do an LLM at Cambridge to study commercial law. I suppose I was slightly in a peculiar position because the year I did the bar course, the year COVID began, and I moved home with my parents, and I wanted a good reason to leave again quickly. And the option was to I wasn't successful getting pupillage that year, and I didn't really know what to do because obviously at the time, easily forget, no one really knew what was going on. That was about August period of that first year. COVID came around, so I decided just to do an LLM. And I was fortunate enough to get a scholarship to go to that. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been able to do it. And so taking out the COVID context, would I then still go and do an LLM? I think there's a lot of benefits to it now, if I'm honest. I actually learnt a lot, besides the money of paying to go and do the course, it can be quite a lot of money. A lot of the stuff I actually learnt on that year I'm using now quite frequently, and I find it very beneficial. I did that for a year. Obviously, just doing an LLM for the sake of an LLM is not what you should be doing. You should be looking at why you're doing that particular LLM or master's course. Just to be in another year in education, but not really knowing why, I don't think that's probably the most sensible thing. But I knew I wanted to understand commercial law in a bit more depth instead of sort of the commercial law you do at undergrad, which is kind of Sale of Goods Act, which is a part of commercial law, but not all of it. And I went in to do more commercial litigation. And I also just made lots of friends and contacts, and actually two solicitors who regularly give me instructions now. So it's not bad in that way also. Yeah, so I would consider doing it. Perhaps I'm slightly biased. But you have to have a good reason to do it. Don't just incur extra debt for the sake of it to do an extra year. You really need to show why you want to do it and what you're going to learn from it. Yeah, tailored approach to it, basically.
Thanks, Callum. Elizabeth, you and I have both been involved over the years in Chambers recruitment. What's your take on whether Chambers are particularly interested in if you've done an LLM or not, and whether that affects your prospects?
I don't want to be rude about LLMs, but I just sort of feel that everyone's got one now. And I'll look through the criteria, and we have a scoring sheet, and it might get you a certain number of points. But if someone else has done something that gives them as good a life experience that's translatable into a career at the bar, then they get bumped up on their points elsewhere. I think maybe I don't give it any particular weight personally. I look at the CV as a whole. I feel that was a real barrister answer to that. Basically says depends, doesn't it? But if they've done excellently at the LLM, obviously that's going to help their application. Mediocre, maybe not, but maybe it was mediocre for a different reason. I think I would just put it in a whole mix and see how I felt about it. Other things I tend to give more weight to. Someone who's dragged themselves up by their socks from state school with no resources and then got a first and then, done excellently at something else. I can see a lot of drive and academic ability in that. Equally, if I see someone who did really rubbish at their A-levels and then excellently at their first degree and then their GDL, I'll be like, I need to understand this person a bit better and understand what went on with their not brilliant A-levels. I say that as a person who got not brilliant A-levels, so I like to give people a chance to explain.
Thanks, Elizabeth. So I think the message is, if you're really interested in an LLM and you've got a topic that's really burning an interest in, then by all means do it. But don't do it simply because the banks offer funding for an LLM, but they don't offer funding for the bar course, because you may come out with a pretty poor LLM grade, which means you've wasted a year, and you've probably got into more debt doing the LLM. So by all means do one. A lot more people do one now than ever did before, but the fact that you haven't done one will not necessarily hold you back. It's just all about getting the best grades you can at whatever you study at, and getting as much experience as you can that you can translate into life at the bar. Okay, I'm going to move on, if I may, now, because one thing that our students listening in have been very impressed with has been the neurodiversity and the neurodivergency of our panelists this evening. And we've got quite a few questions about this, because obviously it is becoming more common now for people to be diagnosed, thankfully, than ever before, and assisted with a neurodivergency. And the first question that we've had is about a top tip for managing studies and extracurriculars with ADHD. Callum, don't necessarily need to focus on ADHD, but top tips for managing your studies and extracurriculars with a neurodivergency.
Yeah, for me it was I probably need to be honest about it. I didn't come out until I was doing my pupillage about it, and I sort of got well, not exposed, but it kind of became apparent that I had something, and I had to tell everyone. I didn't tell anyone, and I thought I was going to be judged for having all these conditions, particularly because I actually think the way application forms are written, and it says put your mitigating circumstances down. Sometimes when I did it, that's what it was, and for me, it felt like you're even the word mitigation, right? There's been a loss. You have to say what you've made up for this thing that you're not at the same level as others. So I was a bit I found that quite difficult to talk about. And actually, from my experience, then that was in the first month of pupillage. So then there was various things that got put in place, and my chambers are really great at helping me with that. I got given my own room, for example, because I didn't really enjoy sharing rooms with other people because it affected actually my ADHD. So in terms of like managing what I do, I have like a coach, which is something I've been able to do now, which helps me do everything. But also it's I think it really is just trial and error. I don't think there's any real way to figure it out. And you just also have to forgive yourself. I think that's the main thing, is that you're gonna I'm renowned for missing social events. Even now, just because I put other things first. And I think the actual process is it's not trying to be able to juggle all of it. It's just forgiving yourself when you never been able to do it. Make sure you prioritize. So I prioritize certain things. Now, for example, I prioritize obviously court deadlines when I have to get stuff back for clients. And I manage that in my clerks, and they help me do that because they understand I'm also a bit chaotic with all that sort of thing. And it can be a bit ad hoc. And I think that's really important. And I think also, like, if I was to go back and talk about, if I was to go back now when I was doing my pupillage applications, I'd just be a bit more proud of what I've got, instead of being like, oh, there's nothing wrong with me, I'm perfect. There's no conditions I have. And because I think it's just you'll end up in the chambers that's right for you, and the one that will accommodate that. And if a chambers doesn't, I can only speak for my own. The chamber doesn't like that, then you don't want to be there, because you've got that condition. You might struggle to fit in. And I think actually reality is all chambers, it's something to think about, but also it's I now the perception's changing. Is it's a bit of a gift depending on how it works for you. For example, for me, my ADHD, I do quite a lot of work quite quickly, because that's how my brain thinks. I can read stuff differently. I struggle with reading lots of papers in one go, and I struggle with the inevitable 9 attachments or 9 forwarded emails people send me telling me what my instructions are. I really do struggle with that. But also then I can also look at an issue quite holistically and just jump in and go, I think that's what the answer is, and it works. So yeah, I mean, so I don't know if that actually answers the question of how I manage it, trial and error and forgiving yourself. But that's how I deal with it, and then you develop a way which works for you after a while.
Thanks, Callum. And Nina, could you address that question as well? And you're obviously at an earlier stage. How do you manage your neurodivergence with your practice? And did you decide to disclose it during your scholarship and pupillage applications?
In terms of dealing with it, just before I got to the applications, at university, I just had loads of, on my phone, diaries, timers, all sorts of things like that. I had sticky notes, even like now in my room, I had sticky notes where I wrote down deadlines and all of that. I'd make put on an A4, like tape it to my wall with deadlines and things I need to do. And that helped me with the prioritization. I think the prioritization I find incredibly difficult. If something new and shiny excites me, everything that I'm dreary that I'm meant to do is immediately forgotten. So having it there in front of you, I also have a real problem with object permanence. As soon as I can't see it, it's disappeared. It's as if it's never happened. So writing it down, putting it in front of you, and using that to organize, sticky notes help because you can move the sticky notes around, keeping them on days. That's how I organize my studies and deadlines. I did kind of the same thing with applying for pupillage. I made a giant Excel spreadsheet with the chamber's name, the deadlines they've got, the areas that they specialize in, any open days that they had, any mini pupilages they did, what kind of the award, what their interview questions were. All of that was in one massive Excel spreadsheet. Which I then, and then the questions were a separate kind of, in the spreadsheet. And if I'd answered, say, one question, then I'd make it green. If it was outstanding, it'd be red. And so I color coded, and that's how I kept everything together. In terms of disclosing it, this was also a weird one because I applied over 4 years. Some years I disclosed it, some years I didn't. What difference that made, I have absolutely no idea. Other than the fact that I didn't, get pupillage, but I'm pretty sure it's, that is not the, that was not the issue. I think it's just a matter for you, and how you disclose it and how you want to relay it back. I think for me, I did well at university, and I had, a full CV, if you will, with various experiences. And I didn't know that disclosing it at that point in the paper sift would be helpful. I will say, though, that I did disclose it when we were given advocacy exercise, any exercise that they give you, say, a day in advance, or if you get invited for interview, I would disclose it at that point. The reason for that is because if they say some places will send you an essay question and you have 1 hour to do it, so they send it to you, say, at 7 o'clock, you have to return the thing by 8. You have 10 minutes reading time, whatever. In that case, I think it's always good for chambers to know, because very often I'd need extra time the way I did at university. And it was in those circumstances that I definitely would disclose it because I'm someone who does need extra time to read. And that's what I did in those circumstances.
Thanks, Nina. And just to say that in scholarship and pupillage application forms, there's usually a box now on the forms asking if you need reasonable adjustments. And it's up to you, obviously, if you want to disclose that you do. But if you do, please make sure that you ask for the reasonable adjustments that you need, and don't be afraid to. And they will generally now ask for evidence that you need that support. And, you'll probably have, hopefully, depending on when you were diagnosed, some background material from the adjustments that you were given at university or any other courses you've done. So please don't be afraid to ask for reasonable adjustments. And whereas historically you may have been concerned about disclosing the fact that you had dyslexia or some other neurodivergency, it is becoming much more common now. And I think Elizabeth described it as a superpower, her dyslexia. Elizabeth, how has dyslexia affected your practice at the bar, and how you've been able to deal with it over the years?
When I was first a pupil, actually university and beyond, I was deeply ashamed of my dyslexia. I grew up in a generation and a different time to most people listening. It was not something that could be talked about, because dyslexia was just translated as stupid. And I think one of my lecturers even said to me, how can you be a barrister, and how can you're not going to be able to produce any written work, which seemed like a really weird thing to say, because when I actually got into practice, they all had typists anyway. Weirdly, I got into chambers at the point where they all ditched their typing and was doing all their own typing. If I'd got in like a generation before, I wouldn't have had to type anything. It would have been brilliant. But the way that my dyslexia works for me, I've got no problem reading. I've got no problem tuning out an entire room of people so I can read merrily in my own world. But I see in pictures, like movies, and things fit together in 3D. So when I'm reading a case, I see how the evidence fits together. And Joe Bloggs says, oh, Brian came in with a red hat on. And then the next witness, Claire Bloggs says, oh, actually it was Pete and they had a green hat. And I instantly see that there's a problem because the pictures don't match up in my head. Another reason why I land with Chambers IT, because I understand, I can see how the systems work and fit together. So there are absolute advantages for me in the way that my brain works. And I hope when I answered some of the questions, I put the link in there to the Dyslexic University by Richard Branson. And if anybody, and I hope that the younger generations don't feel the shame that I feel or felt, and it's only in the last 3 years that I've openly said that I'm dyslexic, that we understand better the positives that thinking differently to, Joe Bloggs' neuronormal brings to this job, particularly when you have to work on your own and there is a lot of reading and you're analysing evidence and all the things that you can do. Callum, reading through things really quickly. He may need a quiet room to move it, to do it, whereas I'm fine in a noisy room because mine lets me ignore everybody. But we understand how we can play to our strengths. So I think it's just really important you understand how to play to your strengths and sell those positives, and don't be ashamed.
Great, thank you. Well, I'm going to move on now, if I can, to another area that we're receiving a lot of questions on, which is about legal, non-legal work experience and mini pupilages. And non-legal work experience and legal work experience rather define themselves, but mini pupillage, just for anybody who isn't sure, is basically an opportunity to shadow a barrister and see what their life is like for a day, 2 days, weeks, whatever. And legal work experience can range from working in a citizens advice bureau, working for charities that offer legal advice or some form of case preparation and assistance. It can also mean going to court and observing, so sitting in the public gallery. Courts are open 5 and sometimes 6 days a week. Every magistrate's court is open for crime 6 days a week. So you can go on your way to do your supermarket shopping for an hour or two. You can drop in, drop out. You can watch the Supreme Court and Court of Appeal now online any time of day that suits you. And then, of course, non-legal work experience can also be very helpful in showing that you have a broad range of skills. So I'd like to turn first to Alexandra, who touched on working at River Island and other opportunities during her career before she came to the bar. Alexandra, how did you bring together your mix of legal, non-legal and work experience, and also mini pupilages?
So for me, I very much valued my legal and the non-legal experience the same, because I think that each of those experiences brought me something useful in my applications. So rather than evaluating them based on whether or not they were legal, I evaluated them based on the skills that I could demonstrate after having had that experience. So looking at the competencies that might be required of a barrister. Often chambers have what's called a competency framework when they are interviewing, where they will set out things that they are looking for, so you can then tailor your application to those. And it might be something like exercising judgment or showing your skills of persuasion. So looking into those experiences and thinking, when have I exercised judgment at River Island? A lot. When have I been persuasive, speaking to clients behind the bar when they're being a little bit difficult? All of these different experiences lend themselves really, really well. So I think it's about making sure you value those experiences. I also think it's not just about the skills that they bring, but how they then set you apart as a candidate, because your unique combination of experiences will stand out on an application. You know, as Elizabeth touched on, lots of people may have an LLM, lots of people may have done you know, very, very well at uni, but that is sort of a baseline, whilst it isn't essential. So those things that are quite unusual set you apart. One of my non-legal jobs was writing obituaries for a newspaper, which was a strange gig I had when I was at uni. I did it after some work experience for a while. And that really stood out on applications because it was a little bit different. And I was able to say that it, you know, demonstrated my written skills, but also my power of storytelling, which was really important for going to the criminal bar. So look for those opportunities. Very briefly, I realize I've talked a little bit long. In terms of mini pupilages, what I would say is be as selective as you can. I don't mean only apply for a few, because obviously there's a numbers game, you want to get some. But what I mean is I don't think you need to do 20 or 30 mini pupilages. I think you need to do a sufficient number to demonstrate that you're interested in the profession, particularly if you're interested in a certain area, and to be able to talk about that succinctly and persuasively at interview. So that would be my mini pupilage tip.
And mini pupilages are hard to come by because there's only so many chambers and there's a lot of competition for them. But don't forget that simply going to court and sitting in the public gallery and watching barristers and other legal professionals do their job is very useful. And perhaps you simply can't take time off to go and do, perhaps you're a full-time carer as well as a student, and you simply can't take a day or a week out to go and do a mini pupillage, but you can spend a few hours every so often in a magistrate's court or watching court hearings online, and be able to talk cogently and coherently about those. And don't forget, as Alexandra touched on, like myself, I had to work in a bar at university. It was probably the best job I've ever had, because the customers were always happy. And but you do always get to talk then about the other skills you've learned. You're good at time management. You're good at remembering important things. you are good at dealing with difficult clients. These are all skills which, if you sit back and make a list of all of the skills you think a barrister might need, a lot of your part-time jobs will give you really excellent experience that, as Alexandra said, you can touch on in your applications when they were thinking about the skills, not just the job title itself. So that's a really important aspect of it. Can I ask Callum how you decided how many mini pupilages to do in what area and when enough was enough?
I did far too many. I can't remember how many I did now. I tried to do ones which were 1 or 2 days just to fit in with my life, because I worked 3 to 4 days when I was at university and then afterwards as well. So I didn't really have time, to be quite frankly. And I was the COVID year, so I could benefit from doing some of them online to get that experience. I initially went into a lot of family law, criminal law sets, because that's what I thought I wanted to do. I realized I didn't want to go in that area too much. I didn't really enjoy the areas of law as much as I thought I was going to. And then I basically just applied to lots, because in my view at the time, I thought, oh, if I have 20 mini pupilages, I'm going to look so good and so keen. And then when I went to actually do my final pupillage applications where I got pupillage, I think it actually only mentioned like 3 or 4, because the reality is, you know, the chambers assessing it they want to see the quality, not the quantity, and what you've learned from it. Just saying you've attended lots of chambers won't usually be that impressive. If you want to carry on going, you got to do it for yourself, just because you want to see what a chambers is like or what an area of law is like. And some chambers, it is a requirement that you do a mini pupillage before getting offered pupillage there. I don't think there's many, but there are a few. So yeah, the advice I would give is 4 or 5 is a very good number to do, provided you learn from those 4 or 5. B, you kind of see what area of law you want to go into. Any more than that, I think you have to justify it, either or of those points I made, as to why you do. Otherwise, it's really just you're better off going to court, watching court, doing other valuable experience, because what happens in the mini pupillage, the experience you get is more personal for you to see how a barrister works, rather than you being able to necessarily take it away and take the skill away going forward, in my view.
Yeah, I think we'd all agree as well. If you've done a couple of mini pupilages in a different area of law than the one you end up aiming for in your scholarship and pupillage applications, it can be just as useful to be able to talk about why you've decided to pursue a different area of law than that one, because you've learned something from the experience and you've applied it to something else. So that can be very useful. But if you can't get many pupilages, then going to court, and then somebody's touched in the Q&A on being able to talk to barristers and solicitors at court. Often you can take the time in their quiet moments when you can see they're not busy doing something else, talking to their own clients. You can ask them questions, and they may well say, oh, well, if you're interested, why don't you come and spend a few days with me next week? Or actually, this case is going to be heard again in 2 weeks' time. Why don't you come to the trial and listen? Or they'll keep in touch with you. So people are very encouraging to students when they've got time to be, and it's a good way of building on that. I'd just like to ask as well, Nina, we've had some questions about international students and their qualifications, and whether you can mention your international work experience is it as valid to have international work experience? I know the answer is yes, but perhaps you could just give us a brief experience on that, please.
Yes, I think it's, if you've got, well, any kind of experience, but your international experience is absolutely just as valuable, because it's part of your journey to the bar. I think, for example, in my experience, I did a lot of volunteering during protests on campus when I was at university in South Africa, and did a lot of work with abandoned and children who were orphans in disadvantaged areas. And I spoke about that a lot, about those experiences, because they fueled and kind of underpinned the reason that, for example, now I want to do crime and family. And I think those are definitely experiences worth mentioning, and also because it's just something that differentiates your application, and helps any panel or any person that sees your application or interviews you, helps them understand a bit more about you as well. I will say that's something you will absolutely get asked if you're an international student. is whether or not it is you want to stay in England and Wales. And so just be conscious of that. That question will come if if like me, all of your family is still back home, but you want to kind of kind of pursue your career here. They're going to ask you, well, not why are you here, but do you have an intention of staying here, and why it is that you want to stay here. My answer to that was that I'd studied MALOB in England, and the opportunities that I wanted here, being an advocate in South Africa, it's very different to being a barrister here. Advocates in South Africa do all sorts of areas of law, where here you can kind of narrow down your practice areas a bit. Anyway, that's my answer. They are going to ask you at some point, so be ready to explain what your plans are if you are planning to stay here. Any experiences that you've got internationally, I think will only help differentiate you and help people understand more about who you are and where you've come from.
Nina, I'm going to move on now, if I may, to some different questions that we've been asked. Somebody has asked in advance of the workshop tonight, some of my motivations for pursuing a career at the bar are very personal. Is it okay to mention these in my application and discuss them at interview, or would that be seen as unprofessional? Elizabeth, have you got any tips on that, given that you're also in charge of recruitment in Chambers and give a lot of advice about pupillage applications?
No one sitting on a pupillage panel or doing a paper sift will be embarrassed by the reasons that you put, and we would be more inclined to listen to honesty. I had someone telling me that they developed an interest in crime because when they were young, they were in a house fire and their parents had been killed, which had led to a lot of involvement with police, lawyers, all that. And through that process, they'd become interested in becoming a barrister. Now, we as barristers hear deeply personal and upsetting things on a daily basis. It's the nature of our job. We only get involved in people's lives when they're in crisis. So we're not going to be embarrassed. If you want to tell us that that's your reason and that's your reason, we'd love to hear it.
And I'd certainly echo that. It's increasingly common, because I chair the scholarships at Inner Temple and see hundreds and hundreds of applications every year, that increasingly common that people have very personal reasons, all sorts of them, for choosing a career at the bar. But the important thing I think to remember is that to raise it, if you feel comfortable in discussing it and it won't upset you about talking about it in some detail, because you must remember that whenever you mention something on your application form for anything at the bar, people will ask you about it and expect you to be able to talk about it. And if it's something that's really going to make you very, very upset and affect the rest of your performance in interview, it might be something that you choose not to major on, or whether you want to talk at all, because the last thing you want to do is ruin your interview by being very, very upset doing it. So just a bit of exercise, a bit of judgment, but in principle, there's no reason at all why you shouldn't mention it and speak about it, because it's often very interesting for us to hear. Can I move on now to another issue, which is also often common, and one student has given an example that they desire to specialise in media law and human rights, but given the difficulty in gaining pupillage, should you aim for a specific chambers or simply try and gain pupillage wherever possible? Nina, you've been most recently through the pupillage selection exercise. Give us a few sentences on this.
I'll start by saying I know we all in our heads, we think, oh, this is my dream chambers, this is my dream set. That's not a thing. Your dream chambers is the one that takes you. So I will say that. And you may have an idea of the things that you are passionate about and that you want to do. So by all means, tailor your applications to those sets and to those chambers. And of course, try to get mini pupillages or any kind of experience or understanding of that area, and then apply to those sets, absolutely. But also, and I did see a question about this, about keeping an open mind. I think it is very important to keep an open mind. And to think about think about what is it that interests you in media and human rights. and any skills or any experiences you've had in building your career towards the bar in those areas, and think whether or not that which interests you is actually present in other areas of law, because you can then also use those experiences and that interest to justify why you may want to try other areas of law, why you may be interested in other areas of law. So absolutely apply for those sets and tailor each application, of course, to each set that you're applying to. But also I would suggest keeping an open mind, because the reality is, until you've done the job, you have absolutely no idea whether or not you'll actually like it, or whether or not it's something that you want to pursue further. And so if you have opportunities, I think, to do other areas of law, then say, for example, in applications, well, these are my interests. I want to do, when I was applying, I said, well, I really want to do clinical negligence. I'm interested in inquests and inquiries, and maybe I'll do a little bit of crime if you've got that going. But now that I'm doing a mixed common law pupillage, every time the clerk says, oh, would you be interested in doing this kind of actions against the police thing? I was like, yeah, go on then, I'll give it a go. I do family, any opportunity now, because I didn't fully appreciate what it would be like on this side. And now that I've done different hearings in different areas of law, I'm getting a better sense of what I'm good at and what I want to do and where I want to go. So yes, say this is what I want to do, this is what I'm interested in, but actually I may also be interested in this because I can see there's an overlap and I might be interested in trying that.
Thanks, Nina. And I think, media law is a good example because there are a few very specialist sets, but it does apply across all of them. You might be interested in human rights and think, I'm only going to apply to Doughty Street or Matrix Chambers. That would be a bit of a mistake, because a lot of people apply to them, and they can't take everybody. And if you've only applied to them, whereas you can, reflecting another question in the Q&A, you can apply to many, many different chambers in a same application round. So you cannot practice as a barrister if you haven't had pupillage and you haven't qualified. So, do apply to as many sets as you can and take a pupillage where you can. I'm going to move on now. We're coming to the last 10 minutes, and just spend a few minutes, if I may, on kind of the differences between a day in the life as an employed barrister and a day in the life of a self-employed barrister. And I'm going to come to you, if I may, first, Alexandra, as employed barrister, and just ask if you could just flesh out briefly the sort of things. Obviously, no 2 days are the same, but the sort of things you might be doing in any given day.
Yes, of course I can deal with that. What I will caveat it by saying is that there are lots of different versions of the employed bar. So, for example, you can be an employed barrister with the Crown Prosecution Service. And if that's the case, you'd have a day that's very similar to a lot of criminal practitioners' days. You'll be in court, albeit you'll be prosecuting. Same within the government legal department. So I'm an advisory practitioner, which means I'm not involved in contentious work. A day for me would more look like reviewing government policy and advising them on the legality of the choices that they want to make. So it's a lot of reading, a lot of legal analysis, and then presenting that analysis to our clients. In our case, my client is Department of Culture, Media and Sport, and that includes policy officials and ministers. So it's far more papers based. Obviously, as I said, I'm not in court, but it also has a political slant in that you're working in that arena. And when I'm working on legislation, which is what I'm doing currently, I'm working with the Office of Parliamentary Counsel, who draft legislation, and building laws and taking those laws through Parliament, which can mean briefing ministers before they go to Parliament, and then also assisting them as the bill makes its passage and becomes an act. That's my current day, but I'm very mindful that there's a real range of employed work. But I'd say the key difference between my life of crime and my current life is that I'm not in court, I'm doing advisory work.
Thanks, Alexandra. And just for those of you who haven't yet really picked up on the difference between self-employed and employed barristers. So employed barristers generally, as well as getting all of their pension rights, holiday rights and other entitlements, are really acting for one client all the time, albeit in a range of different roles, depending who their employer is, whereas self-employed barristers, unless they're stuck in a long case for a period of time, would be acting for different clients on different days, which can also be a different attraction of the job. Callum, you've got a broad civil and commercial practice, so describe to us 2 years into tenancy really what you're doing on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, so I'm actually only a month into my tenancy. I think
really?
so. I was called in 2022. Sorry, that wasn't. I finished my pupillage last month, and so my web profile perhaps is more expansive than reality at times. I'm mostly just doing possession hearings, but no, I do the full range of stuff in terms of. There's lots of options in my chambers as to what we can do. We are kind of advertised as a commercial set, but the reality is a lot comes through the door, and it's up to you whether you want to do it or not. And the reason why I've chosen quite an expansive practice is because I want to see as much as possible at the start of my career. Quite frankly, I'm still not too sure what I want to specialize in. I like all different areas, and I think in reality, what you're good at or what you enjoy more will just end up becoming what you specialize in, because that's just what happens. So the last couple of weeks I've been in the Court of Appeal, I've been in the High Court unled. I was meant to be in the High Court today on the urgent list, and it didn't happen. So I've been doing back and forth conferences, being led. I do a lot with Advocate, the pro bono work with them, because again, also you can do some work which is perhaps would go to someone perhaps more senior or be a more complex case, but because it's pro bono, they'll happily give it to someone potentially a bit more junior. And the what happens day to day really just does vary. And one thing is it's having a court-based practice or a written-based practice and what you prefer. Mine is very much I'm told what to do at the moment. But I'm in court almost 3 to 4 days a week, and I think over time it can become quite tiring doing that and then staying on top of written work. And the reality is, over time, you don't go to court as much in the areas of practice I do. It's very rarely. But having said that, I think it's really important to get court experience early on, and kind of really cut your teeth and see sort of the jungle that can happen in various courts around the country, and equip yourself with that, because in 20 years, 20 years in practice, you might not get the same opportunities. So I do say that even if you're going into commercial construction practice.
Thanks very much, Callum. And Nina, in your opening remarks, you touched on your day-to-day life. So I'm going to come to Elizabeth, who's now got, but is doing a different practice area again in family and dispute resolution. Elizabeth, give us a thumbnail of your day-to-day practice.
So this morning I got to walk my dogs and not get rained on. I then had a conference in a solicitor's firm an hour away from where I live, and the clients freaked out about fixed recoverable cost regime, so that took at least an hour to explain to them. And then I legged it to here. I picked up some papers you may not have noticed while we were sat in here for a case that I'm been appointed for the qualified legal representative for tomorrow. So I do a bit of advocate and a bit of QLR work to give back, because you get paid for QLR work, but not very much money. It's people who don't have legal representatives but shouldn't be cross-examining the person on the other side. So you go along and do the cross-examining for them. So I shall be reading those papers tonight, prepping my cross-examination and getting up early to go to Portsmouth in the morning. I'm not sure if that's going to be 1 or 2 days. That's the nature sometimes of QLR work. And for the rest of the week, I am prepping allegedly for an FDR that I've got on Monday, which is a financial remedies dispute resolution hearing. So you're not in a trial, but you're trying to get people to agree their matrimonial finances. But my solicitor's threatening to apply to adjourn. So then I have to weigh up. I pay court chicken when I start prepping that case for work that I may not need to do because the case is going to get adjourned. And that's my week.
And just help us with what QLR stands for.
It's a stupid acronym, and I say that because it stands for Qualified Legal Representative, but you're not actually the representative of the person you're appointed to, because you're told specifically you're not allowed to advise them, which means everyone who you're appointed to gets really excited and think they have free legal representation, and then you have to tell them that you're not actually representing them. So I think whoever, I'm sorry, Alexandra, you can take it up internally for me. Whoever came up with that name in the government, they need to rethink it.
Okay, well, we're coming to the end of our workshop now. We finish at 8, but I hope that those of you who are joining us online have realised that this is a terribly rewarding and varied career, and that you can come to it from any background, and with all sorts of different life experiences, neurodivergencies, disabilities. and you'd be very welcome for a career at the bar. We're very happy to for the staff to answer more questions after this. All of the inns have teams who help with students with their questions about life at the bar, and for you to be able to come and experience some time at the bar or looking around the inns as well. So do take time to do that. So I'm just going to finish in asking each of our panelists to come up with in their 3 words that describe their career best at this stage of their career. And Elizabeth, I'm going to ask you first.
Fun, hard work. I can't get that into one word. And I love it.
Yeah. And Alexandra?
Stimulating, challenging, dynamic.
Okay. Callum?
Rewarding, agony and ecstasy. Either or.
And finally, Nina.
I can't swear, but I would say it's the flipping Wild West. But it's, so there you go.
Okay, well, thank you very much, everybody, for giving up. Can I, on behalf of the those who are joining us online, can I thank the 4 panelists particularly, and Jess, for their presentations and their willingness to engage with the process this evening, and of course all of our volunteers who've come from the inns tonight, the education and outreach teams who have been busily answering questions on live during the course of this evening. Thank you ever so much for all your assistance and the time you've given. Jess, final words from you about being able to access this presentation online afterwards for anybody that wants to go over it again or pass it on to other students.
Yeah, absolutely. So tomorrow, I'm going to say afternoon to give myself more time. I'll be on a train to Leeds. So I will send round a link to the recording and also the slides as well in a PDF, as well as all of the links that kind of Elizabeth has really helpfully shared as well, just in case you missed them in the chat. So then my final plea will just be to please complete the feedback form from the event. I know everyone's probably wanting to go off and eat their dinner, but yeah, if you can, that would be great, because we like to make sure that we're running events that are helpful for you. So yeah, just echo what Fiona's already said. Just thank you so much to our panelists. Really insightful discussion that's been really enjoyable. So yeah, thank you very much.
Good night, everybody.